Okay. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Navigating the IEP Process. My name is Debbie Killian, and I'm with the Central Branch of the Howard County Library System. We thank Ann Scholes of the Family Support and Resource Center and our presenter, Chris Matthews, Howard County Public School System Facilitator of Special Education Compliance. Chris has served in special education within Howard County Public School System for 20 years. Throughout his career, he has taught at both middle and high school levels with a focus on supporting students with emotional disabilities. Currently, he serves as a facilitator of special education compliance. Chris Matthews is a product of the Howard County Public Schools himself and is deeply rooted in the community. He lives in Howard County with his family, and his 2 children are currently enrolled in public schools. This presentation will be recorded and made available on HCLS YouTube on demand. If you have general questions, please put them in chat, and we are happy to take them as they come up. If you have specific questions, please email Chris or Ann, and their emails will be made available. Thank you. Okay, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I first of all just want to thank the Howard County Library. I know you do a lot with the community, a lot with the school system, so this is just one more thing that we're really excited and happy to collaborate. So thank you for setting this up, and thank everybody for being here. I appreciate the intro, and I always like to introduce myself first. Let me make sure I got this working here. I always like to introduce myself first as a parent. That's my most important job. The parent of 2 beautiful children. Right here, this is Grace and James, and a community member, like Debbie said. I've lived in the community over 40 years. Was product here, worked in the school system for 20 years, so I've been here a long time, and I don't plan to go anywhere anytime soon. So always really excited and happy to get back to the community in any way that I can. So, like I said, my first job as a parent. Do a lot for the school system as a parent, and then my real job, my money job, my job to make money, is the facilitator of special education compliance. So in a nutshell, what that means is I support our system with there's a lot of rules, a lot of regulations in special education coming from the federal government, the state government, the local government, and I try to take those things and organize them and communicate them in a way to our staff so that they can do what they need to do for kids. So that's my job in a nutshell. And a lot of that is also working with community to support our families with understanding the process as well. So that is what I'm here for today. I do have my email on here, and Ann's email. Ann Scholes is here, where she is the Family Support Center and does amazing work supporting our families and our community as well. So if you have questions, maybe if there are questions that are really specific for you and your child especially, please feel free to email us afterwards, and I'm happy to either answer or certainly point you in the direction of the right person to answer your questions. And at any time during this, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I think that's what we just said, what we landed on was going to be the most efficient way for you to ask questions. There's a lot of topics that I was asked to discuss today, including the steps and the process and the difference between IEPs and 504s, how to advocate, how to prepare for meetings. So this is a lot of things to talk about in 45 minutes. So I'm going to go through a lot, but if you're asking questions about certain things, I'll kind of know to focus on those things. I did want to get an idea of who is here today. If you're on the chat, can you let me know if you haven't started the process, or are you in the process? If you just say, like, not in the process, or in the process, or we have a child with an IEP, that kind of helps me to focus. And then if you have a child, maybe like your grade your child's in, like if you have a pre-K student or an elementary student or a middle or a high school student. Okay, not started, just started, like so new. Okay, so sort of new. Okay, so we got secondary, elementary. Okay. Okay, so we have a range. Okay, cool. Elementary. All right, that's really helpful to know. Still new to IP. Okay. So a lot of people that are just started pre-K, all right, that's helpful to know too. A lot of times our processes for pre-K are a little bit different than our processes for elementary. Guys, if you've been in it a little while. So when I say things, I like to know when we have pre-K folks because I will make sure that I say something the asterisk is for pre-K. Okay, brand new to brand new to IEP. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so the first of all, what is an IEP? So an IEP stands for Individualized Education Program. And basically, it's a legal document that says what a child needs. It's a lot of times people say it's will mistakenly say that the P is plan, but remind folks it's program. It's a program, including goals and objectives, includes accommodations, includes how we're going to instruct your child in those specific areas of needs due to their disability. It's a pretty hefty document. And that's why, one of the reasons I know why a lot of you are here today, because it's a lot to go through. It's a lot to understand. So it's developed for children between 3 and 21 who attend a public school. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about process. I know for a lot of the process, so for a lot of this, I like to focus on like the questions to ask and the advocacy piece. I talk a lot about that. So the process, I might not talk as much about, but if you have specific questions about process, please ask while I'm going through this. Because there's a lot. There's a lot to the process. So I try to boil it down to as simple as possible. And I know that one of the questions that was asked before of me to talk about was the referral. So if you have a child that you haven't started the IEP process yet, and you think, that your child may have a disability, or they have a disability and think that they may have an educational disability, then all you need to do to start that process is send an email to the school. You can send it to the administrator, the special education instructional team leader, and say, I'd like an IEP meeting to talk about the needs of my child. And that's as simple as it needs to be for you to be able to get that started, if that's something that you have a need for. What'll end up happening is you'll have a initial referral IEP meeting where the team will bring all the data that they have. You'll bring anything that you have and talk about the child's needs and whether or not you suspect that there may be an educational disability. If the team, I should say, suspects that there's an educational disability, then the team will conduct an evaluation, which usually will include assessments, typically as well. So they include assessments in all the areas of suspected disability. So if we suspect the disability impacts reading, math, behavior, etc., we'll assess in all of those areas. Then the team will come back to an eligibility meeting and use all that data that they collected and your input, the parents' input, and make the determination if the child is eligible for special education services. And then if they are eligible, then they develop and approve an IEP. After that's approved, then the IEP will get, with your authorization, the IEP gets implemented, the services, the accommodations, all the things in that program get implemented. And then the team is required to report on progress every quarter. And so that's that beginning process in a nutshell. Can you reapply? There's no time limit. So, any amount of time and any amount of time, because things change, with children and with, how they're able to access their education, right? So if, you did it a year ago and you are seeing other things, then you can schedule a meeting and have that initial referral meeting, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. You can have a meeting and have that conversation. We were here a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever. I know we discussed this, but we're seeing this and that's new. All right. And so I want to just we want to talk that data through. IEP meetings are supposed to occur. So after this initial process, there are so they were required to meet at least annually to do what's called an annual review. And the annual review the purpose of that is to just update the IEP. So we're required to every year. Then every 3 years, I have slides on this too, but I mean, I answer it now. Within every 3 years, we're required to hold what's called a reevaluation, where we look at all the data and determine eligibility again. Oh, can I read the question aloud? I'm sorry. It's popping up on my screen. Sure. So the first question was, when can you reapply if the school has declined to conduct an evaluation in the past? And so what I replied is that there's no time limit. Any amount of time that you're seeing changes, things are different. You can schedule a meeting with the team and have that initial conversation. And then the second question was, how often are IEP meetings supposed to occur? And that's when I was saying that legally, after this initial situation is completed, we're required to meet at least once a year for that annual review. But we can meet more. We can meet more often if there's other issues, other concerns. There's other reasons that you might meet, but at minimum once. And then every 3 years, we're required to have what's called a reevaluation to rediscuss eligibility. But you can have those earlier as well if there's other concerns too. Okay, so this is the other big question that we're often asked and it's discussed in IEP meetings is, how does a child qualify? Like, what does that mean? What are the things that have to happen? So there's 3 basic things, and it looks very different for every single child, but these are the 3 things that the law says have to be true in order for a child to qualify for special education. So the first is they have to have a disability, and that's kind of the obvious one, right? They have to have a disability. And the second one is there has to be an educational impact. So, the impacts in reading, the impacts in math, the impacts in behavior, in social emotional, and functional skills, right? There's some sort of educational it's impacting in the school. And then the third is that the child requires specially designed instruction in order to make progress in their enrolled grade level. Sometimes 1 and 2 can be true, right? You can have educational impact, but maybe you just need accommodations. You don't need that instruction piece. Usually that's the kind of situation where we'd be looking at a 504, but not necessarily, but that's usually when you think of, and I have a couple more slides about 504, but usually when it's just the accommodation piece, that's we're looking at a 504, and we're looking at IEP when we need that instruction specifically. So this I had talked about earlier to answer a question, but annual review, if you're eligible for special education, you get that initial IEP. Then you can be expected to have a meeting at least once a year called an annual review. You're going to update the present levels, where's the student functioning, you're going to update goals and objectives, you're going to make any other updates that are necessary. That being said, you can make updates at any time. And then the other meeting that I was talking about is that reevaluation. And that's where you talk about, okay, here's all the current data. Basically, do we continue to suspect a disability? Do we have additional questions that need to be answered with assessments for an evaluation? And, we can always test sooner too if we're continuing. I mean, if you had an initial year ago and you're seeing vastly different data a year later, you can hold a reevaluation. Thank you, Anne, for putting in that template. That's really helpful. So I did put some resources about process. Like I said, I didn't want to go too deep into process because there's a lot of minutia, and everybody's sort of in a different place with process. So, but there's some really good resources. MSDE has a parent series that's really simple, really parent friendly, that you can access. That's that first link. There's a ton of other MSDE publications as well. That second link will take you to a list of a lot of different MSDE publications. That's if you get a little bit into the weeds in that one because there's a lot of stuff there. But that's why I put that parent series as the first one, because I think they have 4 or 5 parent friendly. Yeah, so I don't know how that's gonna happen. I think that afterwards it's gonna be emailed, is my understanding. Um, to whatever email you included for the registration. I think that was the situation. And then the third one is our Family Sports Center. That's what I was saying. Ann supports that center. And then Parents Place of Maryland is an organization that is outside Howard County Public School System, but they have a lot of really great resources. In fact, I think the one that Ann put there above was from Parents Place of Maryland. So they have a lot of really good templates and letters and resources. And then the last one is Howard County SECAC, and that is our community outreach organization. So they support, they partner with Howard County Public School Systems, support parents, and do a lot of advocacy and do a lot of great things. Yeah, so that's a great question. So if a student has an IEP, I usually say within school. So if you're moving within Howard County, the IEP transfers automatically. There's nothing that you need to do. There's no such thing as not having a spot. We're legally obligated to provide those services. That being said, if your child was in like a special program, like a regional program or some sort of other special program, it may be a little bit different. Also, if they're a preschool student. So I don't remember if you were one of the folks that said they were in preschool. But our preschool programs are not in every single school. If they're K to 12, okay, so pre-K, yeah, so pre-K is a little bit different, and I would direct you to some individuals in that program specifically um, to answer that question because they deal with like I don't know specifics about like programming for pre-K. So I would point you in the direction of those folks. If you want their specific contact information, you could email the email address that I provided to me and Ann, and I can let you know specifically who the folks are to reach out to support you with that.
Can I just add something to that, Chris?
Sure can.
Outside the typical what every student needs to do when they're moving. You need to let the school know. You need to have your documentation showing a lease or a contract or something like that. So that's also the general requirements as well.
Yeah, and they can help you with that when they're transitioning. When the student's transitioning to kindergarten, they do a lot of work for that transition process. So that's something to start asking your school, even early, as early as you feel comfortable, about that transition process, especially when they're 4 going to 5, because that's a big transition. That 4 to 5 transition. So the early as you want to talk about it, it's definitely something to think about, start asking questions about. Were there any other questions about process or other things? Like I said, keep the questions coming as I'm talking. Feel free to interrupt. I'm gonna go on. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the IEP versus 504. I was asked to discuss this. I want to give a disclaimer though that I'm not an expert in 504. So IEP and 504 are different worlds, and so I'm going to talk about. I created this chart to talk about the differences. But if you have questions about 504, I can help point you in the right direction. I know those folks very well in that office. However, my lane is IEP, so I just like to say that disclaimer. Understanding the difference, there's a lot of differences. They're very different. And the first is the legal basis is very different. So special education law is under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, it's IDA, whereas Section 504 is under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they're very different. They're different laws, different regulations, different processes, etc. A lot of times people lump them together, but they're very different because they're very different laws. So the purpose is really what I said before. The purpose of the IEP is to provide special education instruction and services to meet a student's unique needs due to their disability. Whereas a 504, the purpose is to provide access. And they provide access to the education environment through accommodations. So when you think IEP, you think services, instruction. When you think 504, you usually think accommodations. In order to be eligible, I talked about the eligibility process for special education. For a 504, it's not nearly as sort of intense. It's not, you need to have a physical and mental impairment that the terminology is substantially limits a major life activity. So that includes learning. And so sometimes that could be asthma, right? If they're not able to access gym without some accommodation. Or, I mean, I worked with a student that had Crohn's disease and he had a 504. He needed significant breaks. We also have students that have autism, that have, a specific learning disorder. They have dyslexia and they have a 504. So there's a lot of different things that for 504 can have. And then for, like I said, for services, IEPs and services, whereas my 504 is accommodations. The document tends to be a lot more comprehensive and intense, and there's a lot more, for lack of a better word, legality, I would say, with an IEP, and oversight. That being said, even though legally, for example, legally, for example, parents don't have to be included in 504, but we're very careful to make sure the parents are involved in the 504 process. So I know Howard County goes above and beyond in ensuring that students with 504s are getting what they need. So again, I can speak sort of the general legal part of it, but I can't speak to the Howard County policies when it comes to 504. But those are generally the differences. Like I said, the biggest is IEP's instruction versus 504 is accommodations. That's really the biggest difference. Any questions about that? Because I know there were a couple people that said like their child currently had a 504. Just to know if there was any specific questions on that piece. Okay. Before I get to my favorite part, as much as I love talking about process, I think this is the most important part, and that is advocating for your child, because that's what we all want to do. We want to advocate for our kids and make sure that they're getting the most out of their education, that they're being successful, that they're making progress, and how do we do that, right? Well, the most important person in that process is you as a parent. You know your child, you know your kid, you know your child is a learner. You've been with them the whole time. If you're, I mean, I know there were some, like, I think 9th, 10th grade parents. You've known your kid a lot longer as an educator than anyone else working with that kid. So it's really important to provide input and be an active member of the process. And so I'm sure that you probably all are, because you're here today. But it's always nice to hear that we want you as us as educators, we want you to be involved. So what I took a survey of a whole bunch of teacher leaders, administrators, instructional team leaders, teachers, and I said, what information do you wish that parents were more aware of during IEP meetings? And are there questions you wish parents would ask? And I came up with about 5 for each. And these are the ones that I came up with. So this is information that your teams, your IEP teams, your schools want you to know, you as parents and guardians and caregivers to know. So one is just to have some familiarity with the process, which you all are working on because you're here. And so you get to know the process a little bit. It just helps. And I think it helps you to feel more confident and feel like, okay, more empowered, right, to advocate, because you have an understanding, like, okay, my kid's annual should be coming up and I know what an annual review is, or my kid's reevaluation is coming up and I know what a reevaluation is, or I know that an IEP can be changed at any time and I have questions and I want to ask for an IEP meeting. So like little things like that, I think it's really helpful to have an understanding of those things, even, at some level. Okay. So the other one is that you can ask for accommodations. And I mean, like, you personally in IEP meetings can ask for accommodations if there's things that you need. The one big one is the virtual versus in person. So I got this light that just turned on my face. So I think we've defaulted now to virtual, and for better or worse, right? Like, me as a parent, I don't mind going to the virtual. My my daughter does have an IEP, so I'm attending IEP meetings. I don't mind the virtual. It's fine. It fits in my schedule. But some people may need that in person to really be able to effectively participate. And if that's the case, then you can ask to have the in-person meeting. Like I said, most schools are going to default to virtual, but it doesn't have to be virtual. It can be in person too. So you can ask for translations of documents. In some cases, we're legally obligated to provide translations for some documents, and then others, depending on the language, we're able to provide. So if that's something that you require, please ask. Sometimes teams wait. Like I said, some are legally, they have to provide them, and others you have to ask, like the IEP. So you can ask for those translations of those documents. It's the same with forms. If there's forms, other things, but just don't be shy about asking for translations. Similarly, for interpreters, so you can ask for an interpreter, and also when you signed up in Synergy, when you signed your child up in Synergy, it will there's a place where you can put if you need an interpreter or not, and sometimes people misclick that. And so on the IEP, it actually says, do you need an interpreter? So it's on the cover page of the IEP. So if it's mistakenly checked, then you want to ask about it or get that fixed, because that's where we look to see if a child needs an interpreter. Somebody asked a question in the Q&A. I missed it. Okay, just let me know if I
I've
missed
got it.
it.
I'm
Okay.
answering them back directly, Chris.
Thanks.
Okay.
I appreciate you.
Sure.
And then any other accommodations based on your need. If there's other accommodations that you need, I had somebody like I was sending it virtually. I was sending like emails, right? And the parent was having trouble downloading the emails, and they said, "Can I just get a paper copy?" I was like, "Of course you get a paper copy." So I printed it out, and they got paper copies. So sometimes there's simple things like that we're able to do to help you understand the documents and be a more active participant. And so don't be afraid to ask for those things. Okay. The other one is next one is to review the documents before an IEP meeting. So we are obligated to send documents 5 days before an IEP meeting. So you should be getting them. If you're not, please ask for them and remind them that they should be sending it. Data, any documents 5 days before. That includes data, the IEP, any other documents they're sharing, teacher reports, that kind of thing, right? So assuming they're sharing them with you, hopefully they are, take some time to review them. Obviously, a lot of these things, you have this like 70-page IEP, you're like, how am I going to look through it? Right. But at least if you focus on like the present levels and the goals, that's really going to be the area that you're going to focus on when you read those. As much as possible, just get to know them so you have some information, because it makes meetings go a little bit more efficiently if you come in with questions, having read the documents. So like I said, that includes all those things. And then also know if you didn't get those documents and you didn't have a chance to review them, you can ask for another meeting. You can say, you know what, I didn't get those documents ahead of time. I'd like to pause the meeting and reschedule so that I have time to review it. I always suggest writing down notes, questions if you have them. I had a lot of parents that would write notes on the IEP. They would look through it, write notes, or just general questions so they can remember. I don't know about you, but like I got a lot going on, so I forget. I look at the document, I have a question, and then I get to the meeting, and I can't remember what my questions were. It seems obvious, but it's just one of those things that sometimes we forget about. And ask clarifying questions to your team. I know that when I was instructional team leader and I was running IEP meetings, I ran so many meetings that I got in a habit of just saying the same thing over and over and over again. And a lot of times I would use words that people weren't familiar with, like jargon or acronyms. And so I would really appreciate it when parents would stop me and say, hold on, what does that mean? And so just know that, we're holding sometimes dozens of meetings in a week. And so just asking those questions of like, wait, hold on, we pause. I'm not sure what that means. What are we talking about here? Is okay. Yeah. So meetings should be scheduled collaboratively, but also understand that one of our high schools, for example, ran 800 IEP meetings last year. So yes, that should be collaborative. However, it's like a doctor's, right? It's really hard to schedule meetings. It's one of my least favorite parts about the job is trying to schedule meetings. So being as flexible as you can is really going to help out the school. That being said, things happen. So yes, you can ask to reschedule. But I think the farther out that teams are scheduling meetings, the better. I work with teams and try to teach teams to try to schedule meetings out early. But if you know that you are going to have an annual review or something in like a month or two, you can ask like, hey, I know we got a meeting coming. Do you have a date and time for that? Because legally, they don't have to provide the notice until 10 calendar days before. What I tell teams is for most of us as parents, 10 days is not enough time. I don't know about you, but 10 days from now, my schedule is very busy. So I do I tell teams as much as possible, schedule your meetings as early as possible, to tell parent like, hey, we got to schedule this sometime in March. What's your schedule like, right? Some of us can do that. Some of us can't. Some of you might have a job, where you don't know your schedule 2 weeks before. So so working with your teams to schedule meetings that work for you, absolutely. But if you need to reschedule, absolutely, you can ask to reschedule. Yeah. Okay, so asking clarifying questions, meeting with your case mate. You can always meet if you can meet outside of an IEP meeting if it is something that is like helping you understand the process or just helping understand like what the program's like, or like there's a lot of things that don't necessarily need to be an IEP meeting. They can just be a conference or a conversation. And so, ask like, does this need to be an IEP meeting, or can we just like chat about what this means? I used to meet with my parents about their IEPs, but just to help them understand what it meant, right? Like we weren't making decisions, but just helping them understand, like just clarifying questions about like, what's this page? What does this mean? Right.
Can I add something real quick to that?
Yes, you can. Please do.
What I used to like to do in the beginning of the school year is kind of establish with my child's teacher what's the best way to communicate. Like
Yep.
some prefer emails, if you're some prefer like a quick phone call after school hours. So that's something that you can discuss in the beginning of the school year.
Yes,
Thanks.
that is a good point. I said this already, but many documents are in native language. So if that's something you need, be sure to ask. And then also understand that when a team sends you an IEP or other documents beforehand, they're draft, right? They're a draft document. So you come to that meeting and then you have a discussion, and then we finalize it after the meeting. So things can always be changed. And that's why they're sending it to you early so that you can read it and you can be a informed member of the team when you get to that meeting. So this is another important thing, is that we really, really, really appreciate your input. We really want your input. We really want parent input. So teams should be reaching out to you to get input for annual reviews, reevaluations, like really any meeting or any process. They should be reaching out to you. And if they're not, then you can still provide it and say like, hey, I want to make sure that X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. Some specific things that teachers like to get. Oh, good question. Thank you. See, it's one of those things. I'm saying words that you're like, what was that? So case manager is assigned to each child with an IEP that is the person's go-to. So they're usually the one writing the IEP, managing the timeline, scheduling meetings, ensuring accommodation and services. Depending on your level, that person may or may not be their teacher. For example, typically at elementary level, the case manager is probably doing like the pullouts, for example. Not necessarily, but they often are. I need this light is time. Whereas in middle school and high school, depending on the kid's schedule, the case manager maybe will like co-teach and see your child in a couple classes, or maybe they'll have them for like a tutorial or instructional seminar kind of class where they're supporting their study organizational goals. So it's going to be a little bit different whether or not that case manager is the one providing instruction. But that's a good question to ask. Like when they introduce themselves, are you going to be providing instruction? Yes, also a good point as well. Whenever you have an IEP meeting, you get an IEP meeting notice, and that has all the participants that are will be listed on that notice. So things to provide, like what do the teams want? So these are specific things, like your child's strengths and weaknesses. You know, like my child's really struggling in math. It's something that or behavior has been a real struggle. Following directions, focus, whatever it is that there's, or what, they're really strong at writing. Like we know they're really strong at writing. They're really good at making friends. Socially, they're really, really strong. What are their short-term and long-term goals? And that's true for any level, right? Like we want to know, what do they want to be? What do they want to do? Because we want to help them get there, whatever that is. And eventually they're going to leave us. And I know that's scary to think about when they're little, when they're in elementary or pre-K. But at some point, we do need to start looking at, like, okay, what are we going to focus on? And start looking at post-secondary. We start talking about post-secondary when they turn 14. And I have a 12-year-old, and that's coming, and that just seems crazy. But so we talk about goals. What is going well or not going well at home and school? Sometimes what we think is going well, not going well at school doesn't necessarily match what you think is going well, not going well. Sometimes this happens with behavior a lot, where maybe behavior at home is really not great, but then they come to school and they're able to keep it together. And so you can talk about that. What does that look like? Or maybe the opposite, right? What are the child's interests? And it may not be educationally related. I always like to know, I always get to know my kids, my students. I always want to know what their interests are for a lot of different reasons, but that can be helpful. Sometimes they have interests we don't even know about. And then if you tell us, we can use that to, get them engaged or focused. How can the school help your child? Sometimes there's things you might not even know about. I mean, my daughter initially had her IEP for specific learning disability. She still does, and there are a lot of emotional needs, and they weren't directly related to the disability that her IEP was written for, but she needed a lot of support, and so that was something that we talked about a lot with the school. I think we talked more about her emotional needs for a while than her learning needs for a little while. And then additional concerns, questions that you have. The earlier that you can bring those up, the earlier the team can support you with them. And I'm going to keep rolling, so please let me know if you have questions. So know your parental rights. It's if you have a student that has an IEP for 5, 6, 7, 8, not their entire career, there's going to be disagreements. It's just going to happen. We're never going to always be agreeing on everything. So know what your rights are. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to exercise them, but read the procedural safeguards, MSDE's procedural safeguards, that gives you what your rights are if you disagree. And that's okay. It's okay to disagree. Sometimes most of the time when parents in the school disagree, that we just move forward. But sometimes you might disagree and you might want to use your procedural safeguards. I always let people know, be sure if you disagree that you have it documented, that's documented that you disagreed. You can always ask to have a DSE staff member. So let's say you're working with a team and it's just something's not working right. Like it's just something's not right, right? You can say, like, can we have a Department of Special Education staff member at our meeting? And sometimes they may be able to come in and help facilitate and support the team. You can also get what's called an IEP meeting facilitator, and that's an outside person, somebody outside of Howard County Public School System that facilitates the meeting. You can also understand your rights for dispute resolution. You can ask for mediation. Mediation is an outside individual that mediates between the school system and Howard County. These are all very formal processes. Due process hearings, state complaints, and are all very formalized dispute recognition. I would say try to work with your school teams and the Department of Special Ed first. So, Anne, can you talk more about a meeting facilitator? Because I've never used one and I'm not that familiar with how a meeting facilitator works.
Sure,
But
I'm
I
happy
think
to
you have
do
a little
that.
more. Yeah.
Sure. So meeting facilitators are the same organizations. I think it's Community Mediation Maryland, that if you're having like a dispute with your neighbor over a fence or something like that, they're those people that that mediate. They are not advocates. They're trained in the special ed meeting process, but they're not trained in special ed laws. They are great when communication is a problem. Not really helpful when you're talking about specific law. So they're volunteers. It takes about, they request 2 weeks notice to get a facilitator. But if you are having communication problems with your IEP team, they're a very nice free option.
Yeah.
So no, they are not an advocate, to be very, very clear.
Yeah.
I do have the follow-up question. I do have resources for free advocates, and I can put those in the chat. Basically, the Autism Society of Maryland, you do not need to have an autism diagnosis. They do have advocates. Parents Place of Maryland, they don't go to IEP meetings though, and then also Disability Rights Maryland. And I will put those three in the chat when I get the websites.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, those are great resources. Okay. All right. So another thing that they want you to know is that the IEP is a fluid document, so it can be edited whenever a need arises. So I tell teams sometimes, it's okay to try something, see if it works, come back in 6 weeks and have a meeting and see did it work and make update or not. Like it's okay. It's okay to do that. I think sometimes people get afraid they have that annual and that's set in stone for a year, but that's not the case. It's a very fluid document. Things change, and we can make updates as often as necessary. And you can request a meeting at any time. So you can say, you know what, I have some concerns. Let's have an IEP meeting to just talk it through, see if we need to make any adjustments to the IEP. Oh, those are the two things. The next part so that was things that the special ed staff and the IT, like I said, I asked all those people if they wanted you to know. These are the things that are the questions that they wished that parents would ask more often. Where's my child performing compared to grade level or same age peers? Because we can talk all about how a child is doing, right? But we need something to compare it to. And so the way that the IEP works is for academic needs for K to 12. It's a little different for pre-K. But for K to 12, academic areas are compared to same grade. Functional skills, social emotional behavior, etc., are compared to same age peers. So that's a really important question to ask, because if a teacher is describing how a student is writing, for example, you're not in the schools, you don't know the curriculum. Like, so, okay, what does that mean? Well, there's a big difference if your child's is in 5th grade and they're rating on a 4th grade level and they're rating on a kindergarten level, right? And I even working in a school, I don't necessarily work in schools. I don't always have a good context of what I should be expecting. And I think that as a parent, I'm often expecting more. Like, I think that my child should be doing more than maybe is typical. So I'll come in with something like, oh, I'm really worried about this writing or this spelling. And they say, this is very typical of a student at this age. And I've even had teachers show me work samples, obviously with the kids' names removed, of other children in the grade. And I say, oh, okay. That makes sense. So that's important to have that context of where your child is functioning. For pre-K, it's all sort of lumped together, and because they talk about developmental, so it's sort of both. But I am not an expert in pre-K, so I'm not going to go any further on that. But it's a little different for the pre-K level. What assessments data were used to determine present levels, or what assessment data were used to make that decision? We make decisions based on data. And if we don't have data, then we collect the data. And that's why we do evaluations. That's why we do assessments. That's why, if you see, for example, a grade level, students marked as second grade reading level, where did that come from? And if we're not sure or it's old, then we can say, hey, maybe we should get some data and get some updated data on that. And, how do the present levels and goals align to the curriculum? So we're tasked with ensuring that our goals and objectives, what we're working on, is aligned to the curriculum, specifically with academic goal areas. So we always want to make sure that what we're working on is aligned with those curricular pieces that the other students in the grade are working on. An example is, let's say you have a sixth grader who has a math goal and they're working on time. Telling time is not in the curriculum. Not that that's not something important to work on, maybe in another area, but as a math goal, that's not supporting the child with getting caught up in the curriculum. So we always want to make sure that what we're working on is aligned to the curriculum, specific, like I said, specific to the academic areas. Thanks, Anne. What are we doing to bridge the gap? As in, okay, my child's in fifth grade reading on a second grade. What are we doing to help my child not just make progress, but make sufficient progress so that we're closing the gap? This question is also why it's really critical to have that general educator at the meeting. And sometimes, we're required to have one, and that's why they're there, to ask those questions too. So when you have these questions, often they'll be the ones that are supporting with answering that question. The next question is, what is this going to look like for my child in the classroom? We have this, 30, 40, 50, 60 page document, this individualized education program. What does this mean for my kid? I feel like that's like the one question I always ask when they're talking about services. What classes are they going to be in? When are they going to be pulled out? What is that pull out going to look like? Who are they going to be with? Are they going to be with other children? So I want to know what it's going to look like for them. So one reason is so I can support my child, so they'll help them understand what's going to be happening, what they're going to be doing. So how will that specialized instruction be provided? When will accommodations be provided? Okay, so they're getting pullouts for when they take tests. Like, where does that happen? When does that happen? How does that happen? Will my student always have to ask, or were they provided? They should be just being provided, but it's a good question to ask, because sometimes it's written the way it's written in the IEP. They are supposed to ask. And then how will the information be communicated to staff? We want to make sure that all staff are getting communicated to and have knowledge of the accommodations and services in the IEP. This is something I'm very, very big on, a big advocate for, and that's how are we moving towards independence? And that's at all levels, every grade level, every disability. We want independence, right? As a parent, that's what I want. I want my daughter to be able to find her shoes by herself. That's really all I want in my life, is to be independent. And so I think as early as possible that you can help your student understand their disability and how it impacts them, and their plan. And again, that's going to be different for every kid. My daughter, when she got an IEP in third grade, she wanted to be at the meeting, and she talked it up at the meeting, and she's been at every single IEP meeting we've ever had. She's amazing advocate for herself, but that's her. Other people, it might not be appropriate, but as early as you can get. I mean, I know I've worked with students who didn't understand that they even had an IEP or disability, and they were much older, and it was very hard to have that conversation because they were like, well, I've had this, how long have I had this? So just helping your child understand what that means for them and in an appropriate way. It's a really hard conversation to have. So I don't want to make light of it. And like I said, it looks different for every person. And if you need support with that, I know, Anne does great work with, there's a lot of parent support groups, parent support, so reach out to Anne if you're looking for anything in that way.
If they're going to the meeting, they can sit down for the first 10 or 15 minutes. They don't have to stay for the entire meeting. I mean, that's absolutely fine. You can, take it slowly as far as that's concerned.
Now, my high school kids, I used to tell them they didn't want to come to the meeting, and I would say, "Hey, we're going to talk about you. Are you sure you don't want and making decisions about you? Are you sure you don't want to be there while we make decisions about your life?" And then they're like, "Oh, yeah, I do want to be there." Okay, so it's usually pretty easy to talk my high schoolers into coming to at least part of the meeting, so they can at least give their piece at the beginning. Um, you know, how much does my child understand how their disability impacts, what that means? And how can we support my child's transition? The hardest times, and this is true whether your child has an IP or not, is the transition periods, the pre-K to K, 5 to 6, 8 to 9, and then post-secondary are the most difficult. And so what is the school doing to support that transition? The earlier you can ask that question, the better. I know probably like day one, my daughter was in 5th grade, and I was already like, what are we doing for next year? Middle school is scary. It wasn't scary, but as a parent, that could be a really tough time. So that's a really good question. I don't think I have
Can you read it?
time to.
Can you read
Yeah,
it, Chris?
yeah,
Thanks.
and it's a really good question. Um, I could do an entire other presentation on that and like standards-based grading. That's more of a general ed situation. The IEP is built to close instructional gaps in areas that are impacted by the disability. Um, and that's all I can really say to that. I think that if you have additional questions and want some additional resources, send me an email and I can get you some other resources. I can't go too deep into that because it's sort of is different than what we're talking about. But it's a really good question. I don't want to downplay that. I'm just looking at the time and I'm recognizing some other stuff we want to talk about. So this is a really big question, and that's how can I support my child at home? So what can I do at home to support my child? Uh, a lot of times it has to do with the independence piece, could be the instruction piece. A lot of times behaviors is something. Uh, so this is a question to always ask. I put it on a separate slide. That's how I know it's a big important one. Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that if you don't have an IEP yet, if their child's not in the process yet, then I think Ann's a really good resource to ask questions to, just about like really general process things. But if you're in the process, then the instructional team leader at your school, and if you go on your child's website, every single school will have a website, or it'll say special education, will have special education ITL. So that's your person that sort of runs the department in your school. There's your case man, and this is in addition to your case manager. Your case manager, so then there's the ITL would be the next person. Then each school also has a Department of Special Education resource teacher, who's like your next level and sort of the hierarchy of supports. And then after that is an instructional facilitator. And that's kind of the hierarchy of support for each school. If the child is already like in the process or has an IEP. And I have a link in here, and I'll show it to you in a minute, that has how you can figure out who your child's support folks are. So communicating regularly is really crucial. If something is like festering, something you're frustrated with, or something that doesn't seem to be working, we want to know it as soon as possible so that we can take care of it. Don't think, oh, I just talked to this person, I'll wait. It's about your child, right? Like we want to get it taken care of. We want to take care of it as soon as possible. You can ask for progress update. How's my child doing? How's my child doing with their math goal? How's it, ask those questions. Like I said before, ask for clarification on anything that has to do with the IEP. Providing parent feedback regularly, especially if it's specific. I think a specific feedback can be as good as helpful. Inviting your child into conversations. And it's, it's a two-way street. So it comes from both sides. If you feel like you're not getting enough communication, you should be getting enough communication, reach out to the school and ask those questions. And like I said, you can always ask for that Department of Special Education staff to attend there if you feel like there's a miscommunication or just things are not working the way that you want them to. That's one of the first things I recommend is we reach out to that DSE person. We're just asked to have that person there to kind of help facilitate things. So know who to contact. I started talking about this before. This link, and again, it's this link, right? Just put it here, has the resource teachers and instructional facilitators. Does it have? I can't remember if it has the schools.
It generally
Doesn't have which schools. How do they?
Schools ITLs are listed in the school staff under special education. If you need help finding any staff, please just email me and I will find out who they are and send you their emails.
Okay. All right, cool. So that link that I just put in is the Howard County public school system website and links. It just has like a list of all the resource teachers, instructional facilitators. So it doesn't tell you like your school who's assigned. So like Ann said, if you want to know specifically like, okay, who's assigned to my school, contact Ann, and that's for the resource teachers and instructional facilitators. For the instructional team leader, like I said before, go to your school's website and it'll be listed on there. And if you're like not sure what the website is or how to find it, you can also ask Ann and she can help you figure out who that person is as well at your school. Questions about that? Okay. This slide is to continue to shout out Family Support and Resource Center that Ann runs. It is your go-to place for any general questions you have about process. And I have her email here. We had her email before. This is the email for the Family Support Center that is like the general email. You can use that as well. And then there's the phone number if you want to call.
So we can also help find community resources if you're looking for support groups or things like that. It's not just help through the IEP process. We can also connect families with community resources.
Yeah, Ann I just can't stop saying how amazing Ann is with finding things, things you wouldn't even think about, like childcare providers or other things in the community that you're looking for. She's a really, really great resource, so I recommend reaching out. I have a few additional links at the end. Most of these I think I talked about in the other slide. But that's pretty much it. There were a couple questions in there that I think Debbie can respond to about the recording and then other presentations that you might be doing.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris and Ann. This has been so interesting and so helpful. This presentation has been recorded. In about a week or so, it will be available at HCLS, which is the library system, Howard County Library System, HCLS YouTube on demand. And so, yes, in fact, you can watch this again and you have emails to follow up. This has been really, really interesting and valuable. And we thank you very, very much for your time, Chris and Ann. And thank you everyone for participating.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. All right,
We
please
appreciate
do
you.
feel free to email me with anything or Ann with anything. It's been great.
Thank you.